In this edition of New England Authors, we talk with an academic turned novelist who goes into the mind of a terrorist who is planning to bomb the G20. His family was bombed by America during the Iraq War. Can that justify his wanting to bomb back? What's it like to be on the other side? Is the author justifying terrorism? Welcome to another edition of New England Authors. Our guest today is Geoffrey Dutton, and he's written a book called Turkey Shoot. We're going to talk a little about that. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me now.
Tell me, what inspired you to write this book?
It was a very deep feeling. And it was basically the Syrian refugee crisis that sort of triggered it. But I had been really very distraught about the U.S. invasion of Iraq and before that Afghanistan, and I didn't think that we should be doing that. And then one thing led to another, to warring factions, and then Syria in the Arab Spring. Everything went crazy, and millions of people had to flee. And I saw these pictures of them trying to get to Greece. And, most of them had lost almost everything, including family members. And so I said, well, when the press and the pundits saw this in this country and in some places in Europe, they said, we have to stop this flood of refugees because they might be sending terrorists.
I see.
And so I said, okay. I didn't like that very much because, maybe 1 in 100,000 might be a terrorist. Yeah. So I said, all right, I'll give you a terrorist. I'll give you someone who's out to destroy your country and your way of life, and I will make you weep for him. And so I invented the main character of this, and I had him going to Greece, and that's basically as far as I had thought ahead.
Okay, all right. But you are an academic, this book, Turkey Shoot, seems to be very different from your academic work. Can you tell us a little about your academic life?
Oh, sure. Which kind of ended in 1999.
Yeah.
And before that, I was an academic. I was also a consultant. I worked in industry and marketing, and my field was geographic information and digital cartography.
Interesting.
When I was doing my master's degree, I was at the Harvard School of Design, and I was studying city planning, but I got kind of diverted by a lot of different things, including some wonderful teachers, into theoretical geography and into a lab that was brand new, that was pioneering digital mapping, which at the time involved chunking out maps on line printers.
I see.
And so
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is that like maps.com or the GPS system that we use?
Oh, no, it was very primitive. I mean, there was hardly any map data around. I'm talking about 1970, say.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And so we had to basically find data by hook or by crook, and we had programs, software that had been developed in our lab and elsewhere that we used for drawing maps, and we put them in publications like the New York Times and Life and National Geographic. I've got maps and all of those things. And then I started programming my own, and I did a lot of experimental cartography, which came to an end when the lab closed, and I went on to other things, but I came back to it in the mid-90s when I was offered a position at the University of Zurich as a graduate student to get PhD, because friends of mine were on the faculty. They knew my work and they wanted me to come, and I already given a bunch of papers about a new method for handling geographic coordinates that excited a lot of people. And so I spent 3 years in Zurich, proving the software, reading a lot, and writing a thesis, and it eventually got published. This is it.
Your coordinates is okay.
But after I left Zurich, I wasn't able to make much of a living doing that because I was too old to be, sort of a junior faculty member somewhere. So I ended up in industry and spent a number of years working as a technical writer, documenting software that other people wrote.
I see.
Because I'd already done that for my own software and other people's software in that lab, and now I was working on graphic software mostly for other companies. And so that's what I did until I finally got tired of high tech, and I left the biz because I was already writing stories. I had already published online maybe 300 stories.
Really?
So I said, okay, I'm going to retire now. I'm gonna just do whatever I want to do, and most of that involved writing. And this novel was born in the summer of 2015, and is basically talks about events that happened just before that or during the writing.
Yes.
And I kind of pressed them all because there are a number of true tales in there that you might remember.
So your main character is Mahmoud, and he comes from Iraq. He's one of these boat people, right?
Correct.
And can I read something that it's one he says? He says,
Sure.
All thanks to American and European lust for power and petroleum, setting Iraq aflame, kindling ancient smoldering hatreds, leveling marketplaces and whole neighborhoods. Then, having crippled his country, the Americans left, oil contracts in hand, handing Iraq over to Iranian stooges. No, he thought, someone has to pay for creating such misery. That's kind of central to your book, right?
Right. That's his motivation.
That's his motivation. And so he wants to, he becomes part of a group that wants to bomb the G20.
Correct.
With sarin gas.
Mm-hmm.
But something happens and changes course. What happens?
What happened was the head of that group, the boss, and there were about 5 or 6 people that were working together, was a Turk who had bombed a number of places in Turkey before he went to Greece, because he was kind of a hunted man. And at one point, the police figure out who he is, where he is, and they grab him. And so part of the book from that point is his group of volunteers scrambling to find a safe place and then figuring out what the hell they're going to do. And another part of it is one of them who takes it upon himself to get this guy who calls himself George, we don't know his real name, out of prison. Mm-hmm. And he, should I go on? I mean, whether or not he succeeds, they do hatch a plan, and the plan is very different than the G20 plan, but right. it involves going to Turkey.
Right. This is New England Authors here. We're talking with Geoffrey Dutton. Jeff Dutton has written a book called Turkey Shoot, and it's a book about the Middle East. You seem to sympathize a lot with the other side.
What's the other side?
The Iraqi side.
Well, I sympathize with my character for sure.
Yes.
And I sympathize with the plight of the people of Iraq who have been through hell. but I don't call them the other side. In fact, I think in this book, you know, I don't editorialize too much about, you know, who's a good guy, who's a bad guy. In fact, there are no good guys. This is entirely from the point of view of Mahmoud and George and the other people who are conspiring with them.
Yeah.
And I just let the reader decide, you know, if they're crazy or not.
Okay. So the G20 was supposed to meet in Turkey, and there was this attack didn't happen. So you must know, you talk a lot about places, Athens, Piraeus, which is the port of Athens, Turkey. Did you travel to these places?
I've been to Turkey many times because my wife's family lives there.
Oh.
She's Turkish.
Uh-huh.
And I speak a little Turkish, not really enough to get along. I have not been to the places that I take people in the book, though. Those parts of Turkey I haven't been to, so, and also I've never been to Greece. That's my confession. And so what I had to do was look at a lot of maps, look at a lot of people's writing about the country, and then like do street views of the places that I decided to have my settings, so I would know what they look like. Like the mosque, and where the kind of the climax takes place, is in Bursa, and I explored that extensively.
Oh, yes.
Remotely.
I know Bursa quite well, yeah. So Mahmoud eventually becomes involved with a Greek anarchist. Can you tell us a little about her?
Yeah, she calls herself Katrina, and she's just 3-4 years older than he is. He's in his early 20s. She is Swiss. She went to school in Switzerland and then signed up to be with an unspecified NGO that sent her to Africa, Central Africa, Senegal, I believe, to, on aid missions. And there she had to cope with infectious diseases and terrorists running around with guns, and people who were hitting on her, and the people who were basically stealing the supplies that they were bringing in, and even the people in her own organization who she considered lazy and possibly corrupt. And at some point it was just too much for her. So she quit. She collected her back pay and she went back home, but she had to stop over in Athens, and her flight was canceled, and there was a lot of chaos there because of what was going on in Greece around then.
This is 2015. This
Yeah,
is very
or 14.
14, 15.
Yeah. And so she got involved with some people who were mostly anarchists, and she decided to stay. And so she managed to meet a woman, and they found a house that was about to be condemned, and they paid it off in back taxes, and they fixed it up for themselves. And that house appears in the book, and it also appears in the sequel that I'm writing.
Oh, okay. We'll get to the sequel in a little bit, but it's very interesting how you were able, as a cartographer, to use the maps, and because it was very clear that you knew where you were going. I know Athens and area, and it was very clear that you knew what you were doing there, and knew some of the culture there.
Well, yeah. I mean, I found out about this bazaar in Piraeus, and I read a couple of blog articles about it, and then I went down on Google Street View to see what the area was like. I tracked bus routes. I figured out what buses people would be taking to get places, or what metro lines. And if they were going to eat in a restaurant, I would find a likely candidate that had an online menu, and so I would know what they would be ordering.
Excellent, excellent. This is New England Authors. So we're speaking with Geoffrey Dutton. He's written a book called Turkey Shoot, and it's about a terrorist named Mahmoud. You include in your book passages from the Quran. Why do you do that?
I divided the book into three parts, and each part is a verse from the Quran, and particularly, I think the first two are are prayers, the words that the faithful say, 5 times a day. And I thought they captured the essence of what Mahmoud was like, because he is religious. He prays every day. He believes in Allah and Islam, but he's kind of an independent believer. He hasn't been brainwashed to be, a hater of anybody. What happened to him gave him hatred, but it wasn't because some imam told him. It was because his life was ruined.
His life was ruined in Iraq by the American invasion, right?
First by the Americans, then by ISIS, because they had to flee from Ramadi when the fighting got bad there to Mosul, and they were happy in Mosul. And his father worked, and he went to school, and his brother went to high school, but then ISIS came and seized the city, and one day he's in school, and he comes home, and his parents are dead. They've been executed, and his brother is missing, and he knows he's next, so he's fortunate enough to have met somebody who connects him to some Kurds who conduct him out of the area and across the border to Syria.
Do you think the United States is very responsible for all this suffering?
Who else? I mean, life was no picnic for a lot of people under Saddam Hussein, but, it was a secular democracy, and they had electricity and running water, and to a much larger extent than they have now.
Why did you set your book pre-Donald Trump? Was that, did you have that in mind, or you just said it because of the Syrian refugee crisis of 2015? Because
Donald Trump didn't announce for president until the book was almost finished. I wasn't even thinking of him.
Mm-hmm. What attitude then did you want to leave the reader with?
That, when people act out violently, or even non-violently, they have their own reasons for doing it, and it may not be because, they want to destroy somebody's way of life, or anything, even approaching ideology. It's sometimes just they want to get even.
Yeah.
Because forces beyond their control have turned their life upside down.
Mm. So you came in to write with this idea in mind. Mm-hmm. What happens to Mahmoud?
Well, he gets seduced at first by Katrina, who meets him on like the first or second day he's in town.
Yeah.
And she gets attracted to him, and eventually, she keeps popping up and inviting him over, and saying that she, loves him, and this creates quite a problem because he's part of a conspiracy that she's not part of. Even though she's friends with a couple of the people there, they haven't told her what they're doing, and so for her to become Mahmoud's girlfriend means that she would have to become one of them.
Mm. Were you afraid that you might be justifying terrorism?
I don't think so. I mean, I guess some people might think it that way just by telling a story from a terrorist point of view, may feel like a justification, but I feel it's like something that hasn't been really explored and should be. I'm a pretty even-handed guy.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think the United States was responsible for all a lot of the chaos in the Middle East and all the deaths in the Middle East. I just wondered, you said you're working on a sequel. What is that sequel?
Well, it involves some of the same people and some new people. Mahmoud's not in it, but his son is. And he and Katrina had a baby.
Right.
But actually, the baby was conceived on Mahmoud's deathbed.
Oh, I see. I see.
And so she came back to Piraeus pregnant and had the child in Switzerland at her, with her parents, and then went back to Piraeus and raised him. And when the book opens, he's 4 years old.
The son, yeah.
And his name is Ramadi.
Ramadi,
which is the last name of his father.
I see, I see. Usually, in Arabic culture, the son takes the grandfather's name, and that kind of works its way down that way. Yeah.
Yeah, except that Katrina's not an Arab. She doesn't come from that culture. She probably wouldn't even know that.
And I get in your book that you were kind of upset at how Muslims were depicted in the United States. Is that true?
Well, I don't really talk much about the United States, but I am, of course. I mean, I don't feel like anyone should be tarred, as despicable as certain elements in our culture do, just because they are not Christian or just because there's some other race.
Yeah. Well, it's so good to have you on the show. I enjoyed Turkey Shoot. It was, I look forward to the sequel. This is New England Authors. We're recording here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we broadcast on stations throughout the region. Remember, watch locally.